All right, guys, let's look at some practice problems for 3-1. Now, this is just a half sheet, and so you're just going to cut it and then put just the half that has stuff on it and glue it into your interactive student notebook. All right, I'm going to pause this, and you should be able to do both A and B on your own. This is stuff we learned in chapter 1, so you should be able to do these on your own by now. So I'm going to pause this. I want you to do example 1, both A and B, and then we'll go over the answers. All right, guys, here are the answers to these. Now, if you recall vertical angles, when two lines cross each other, okay, vertical angles are opposite sides of the X. So like this angle and this angle would both be vertical angles. Or this angle and this angle would both be vertical angles. So we would have 4 different pairs of vertical angles in this one diagram. Okay, and then linear pairs, guys, any 2 lines that when you put them together, or 2 angles, I'm sorry, when you put this angle together with this angle, right, you would form this line here. So that would be a linear pair. So 2 angles that are side by side that when you put together, they form a linear pair. Okay, so those 2 angles would form this straight line right here. Okay, so you should know what vertical angles and linear pairs are. If you don't, please learn them before we get too much further. That was a chapter 1 concept. All right, guys, let's look at example 2 now. Here we have this right rectangular prism. It looks like a box. And the directions tell us to classify each pair of the lines as either parallel, intersecting, coincident, or skew. Okay, so in order to classify them, you have to know which each one of these are. So if you look back on the foldable we just did, parallel lines, they're coplanar, but they do not and would not ever intersect. Okay, so it can stand far out and they would never intersect. Intersecting, guys, that just means they cross each other. Okay, coincident lines, that means that they lie directly on top of each other. Okay, and last but not least, skew. Guys, skew lines do not intersect, but they are not coplanar. So that's the difference between parallel and skew. All right, if we look at this, part A says we're looking at line AB, which is right here, and line BC, which is right here. All right, so AB and BC. Now, if you look here, when we write these out, we can see that they intersect at point B. Okay, so the only option, these would be intersecting lines. And if we wanted to be a little bit more, exact, I know it's not one of the options, we know this is a right angle because it tells us they're right angles. We could say that they are perpendicular. Okay, all right, so let's look at B now. So part B, we want lines AD, which is this line right here, AD, and BC, which is this line right here. Okay, well, if we look at these will never, ever, ever intersect. Okay, so that tells us that we've narrowed it down to either parallel lines or skew lines. Okay, well, the difference between parallel and skew is parallel lines are coplanar, skew are not. So, does these 2 red lines lie on the same plane? Okay, so I'm going to highlight this plane right here. Okay, that would be a plane, guys. Okay, so clearly they do lie on the same plane, and since they lie on the same plane and they do not intersect, we would call them parallel lines. All right, let's do our very last one here. Let me erase this. All right, so it says lines BF. So this is line BF. And line EH. So this would be line EH. Okay, now if I look at these, they do not intersect. Okay, so I'm left with either parallel or skew. Okay, now the difference between them is, are these 2 lines coplanar? Well, we can clearly see that there's no plane that we can draw that both of these lines would be on. So no, they are not coplanar. And since they're not coplanar, that would mean these have to be skew lines. Okay, now I know we didn't do an example of coincident, so I'm going to give you an example. Coincident. I'm going to give you an example. So an example of some coincident lines, let me erase these, would be lines EI, and it's line, we're going all the way through, and IH. Okay, because if we put these EI and we want the line so it goes all the way through, would be this. That would be EI. And now if I were to draw IH, well, IH is right here. So notice those lie directly on top of each other. So that would be an example of coincident lines.